I've spent years studying spiritual law, watching how thoughts become things, how words shape our reality, and I've noticed something remarkable. Most people think transformation takes months, even years. They believe real change is this slow, grinding process where you chip away at your problems day after day, hoping that eventually, someday, things will be different. But what if I told you that's not how the universe actually works? What if the most profound shifts in your life could happen not over months, not over years, but in just 7 days? I know that sounds impossible. I know your logical mind is already pushing back, saying, "Come on, nothing real happens that fast." And I understand that resistance, because I felt it too. But here's what I've discovered after working with thousands of people, after watching miracle after miracle unfold. There's a secret embedded in spiritual law that changes everything when you understand it. It's not about working harder. It's not about forcing change. It's about aligning yourself with a power that's already within you, a power that's been waiting your whole life for you to finally recognize it and use it. Right now, in this very moment, you are standing at a crossroads. You might not feel it. You might think today is just another ordinary day, that you're just another person struggling with the same old problems, carrying the same old burdens. But I'm telling you, something different is available to you right now. There's a door standing open that you haven't noticed before, and behind that door is a completely different way of living. A way where you're not constantly fighting against circumstances, where you're not exhausted from trying to control everything, where you finally feel like life is working with you instead of against you. I want to take you on a journey over these next 70 minutes, and I promise you, if you really hear what I'm saying, if you let these truths sink deep into your consciousness, your life will never be the same. This isn't about positive thinking tricks or motivational hype that wears off by tomorrow. This is about understanding laws as real and reliable as gravity, laws that govern how energy moves, how circumstances shift, how the invisible becomes visible in your life. So let me start by telling you about a woman I once knew who came to me absolutely desperate. She'd lost her job, her savings were almost gone, and she felt like the walls were closing in. She said to me, "I've tried everything. I've prayed, I've worked hard, I've done everything I know how to do, and nothing changes." And I looked at her and asked one simple question that stopped her in her tracks. "What have you been saying about your situation?" She paused, confused, and then started listing all the fearful, worried thoughts she'd been repeating day after day. "I'm running out of money. I can't find work. Nothing ever works out for me." And right there was the problem. She wasn't failing because she wasn't trying hard enough. She was failing because she was using the most powerful creative force in the universe, her words, her thoughts, against herself. She was literally calling into existence the very thing she feared most. Every night before bed, she would lie there, mind racing, and she'd say, "I hope I don't mess up tomorrow. I really hope nothing goes wrong." And the universe, hearing only the dominant thought, heard, "Mess up, something going wrong." It cannot hear the hope, it cannot hear the don't. It only hears the image you create with your words. This is what people don't understand about the law of your word. You think you're being careful, you think you're being prepared, but you're actually being creative, and you're creating the wrong thing. I worked with a man who came to me because he couldn't understand why he kept losing money. Every business venture failed. Every investment went south. And when I listened to how he spoke, it became crystal clear. "I knew this would happen," he'd say. "Things never work out for me." And then he'd add almost proudly, "I could see it coming from a mile away." Well, of course you could see it coming. You sent it ahead of you with your words. You announced it, declared it, called it by name, and then acted surprised when it showed up at your door. Your word is not a commentary on your life. It's the architect of your life. Every time you speak, you're drawing up blueprints. And the universe is a very efficient contractor. It builds exactly what you design, down to the last detail. Now here's where it gets interesting. Most people, when they hear this, they panic. They become terrified of their own thoughts. They try to control every word, monitor every sentence, police their own mind like some kind of spiritual prison guard. And that doesn't work either, because fear is just another form of faith. Fear is faith that something terrible will happen. It's still creative power. It's still you calling something into being. So what do you do instead? You get deliberate, you get intentional, You stop speaking casually about your life, and you start speaking creatively about your life. You use your word the way it was meant to be used, as a tool, as a power, as a key that opens doors instead of locking them. I had a woman tell me, "But Florence, if I say everything is wonderful when it's clearly not, aren't I just lying?" And I said, "No, darling, you're not lying. You're testifying to the truth instead of to the illusion. You're speaking to what's real in the invisible realm instead of what's temporary in the visible realm. See, when you look at your bank account and it's empty, that's a fact. But it's not the truth. The truth is that the universe is infinitely abundant and you are one with that abundance. The fact is temporary, the truth is eternal. And your word has the power to bring the truth into the realm of facts. This is why affirmations work, but only when you understand what you're actually doing. You're not trying to convince yourself of something false. You're aligning your word with the highest truth, and then that truth begins to manifest in your physical reality. I knew a man who was drowning in debt, absolutely drowning. And every time someone asked how he was doing, he'd launch into this long story about his debts, his struggles, his problems. He was rehearsing his poverty. He was narrating his lack. And every time he told that story, he reinforced it. He made it more real. He gave it more power. I said to him, "Every time you tell that story, you're placing an order with the universe for more of the same. Is that what you want to order?" And something clicked for him. Within a week, he stopped telling the story. Within a month, the situation began to shift. Not because the universe suddenly decided to be nice to him, but because he stopped reinforcing the negative pattern with his words. He stopped ordering disaster and started ordering something different. You see, most people don't realize they're walking around all day, placing orders. "I can't afford that." Order placed. "This always happens to me." Order placed. "I'm so unlucky." Order placed. And then they wonder why their life looks the way it does. They're getting exactly what they ordered. They just didn't realize they were ordering it. Now, I'm not saying you should lie to yourself. I'm not suggesting you stand in front of the mirror and repeat affirmations that you don't believe. That's just noise. What I'm talking about is becoming aware of the casual, repetitive stories you tell that are programming your subconscious mind and sending out vibrations into the world. Your subconscious mind doesn't judge. It doesn't say, "Oh, she's just venting, she doesn't really mean it." No, it takes everything you say as an instruction. It's like the most obedient servant you've ever had. You say, "I never have enough money," and it goes, "Understood." Creating more experiences of not having enough money. You say, "Nobody respects me," and it responds, "Got it." Arranging more situations where you feel disrespected. This is why people stay stuck for years, sometimes decades. Not because they're cursed, not because the universe has it out for them, but because they're consistently, persistently, innocently ordering the same thing over and over again with their words. I had a woman come to me once who couldn't understand why she kept attracting the wrong men. Every relationship ended the same way. Betrayal, disappointment, heartbreak. And she'd say to me, "Why do I always pick the wrong ones? I have terrible taste in men. I'm so bad at this." Do you hear it? I always pick wrong. I have terrible taste. I'm bad at this. Those aren't just observations. Those are declarations. Those are orders being placed with the universe. And the universe, being the perfect order taker that it is, kept delivering exactly what she was asking for. I told her, "You're not bad at choosing. You're excellent at manifesting exactly what you're declaring. The problem isn't your taste, it's your testimony." She looked at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. But slowly, it sank in. She began to hear herself. She started catching those automatic statements before they left her mouth. And more importantly, she started replacing them with something different. Not with lies. Not with, "I'm amazing at choosing partners" when she didn't believe it, but with, "I'm learning. I'm becoming clearer about what I want. I'm attracting better with each experience." Small shifts. Believable shifts, but shifts nonetheless. And here's what's beautiful about this. The moment you change your words, you change your vibration. The moment you change your vibration, you change what you're attracting. It's not magic, it's law. It's as predictable as gravity. Think about someone you know who always seems to have good luck. Pay attention to how they, talk. They don't dwell on problems. They don't rehearse disasters. When something goes wrong, they say, well, that didn't work. What's next? When something goes right, they celebrate it, they talk about it, they let it fill their consciousness. They're not pretending, they're not delusional. They're just naturally aligned with what they want because their words support it. You see, most people are swimming upstream with their mouths. They want love, but they keep saying nobody really sees me. They want abundance, but they complain about prices everywhere they go. They want health, but they discuss their symptoms like morning news headlines with anyone who'll listen. And here's what breaks my heart. They think they're just being honest. They think they're just talking about reality. But what they don't realize is that they're creating tomorrow's reality with today's words. I watched this happen with a woman who came to me exhausted, absolutely depleted. She wanted more energy, wanted to feel alive again. But every single day, the first words out of her mouth were, "I'm so tired." She said it to her husband at breakfast, she said it to her coworkers, she said it to the grocery clerk. She was literally declaring tiredness as her identity. I asked her to try something radical, for just 1 week. Stop announcing how tired she was. Not to lie if someone asked directly, but to stop volunteering it. Stop introducing herself to each day with that declaration. She looked at me like I'd asked her to climb Everest. "But I am tired," she said. "What am I supposed to say? Say you're looking forward to feeling more energized?" I told her, "Say you're taking care of yourself. Say you're listening to what your body needs. Say anything that doesn't seal you into the identity of an exhausted person." 3 weeks later, she told me something shifted. Not because the affirmations were magic, but because, when you stop constantly affirming the problem, you create space for something new. You stop being the person who's tired, you become the person who's recovering, who's healing, who's on their way back to vitality. Your words are always doing something. They're never neutral. They're either building the bridge to what you want or reinforcing the walls around what you don't want. And most people have no idea how much they're talking themselves into corners all day long. "I can't afford that. That never works for me. I'm just not lucky. People like me don't get those opportunities." Every single one of those sentences is in grace. Instruction to your subconscious mind, to the universe, to life itself. You're basically walking around with a megaphone, announcing what you expect, and then you're shocked when life delivers exactly that. Now, I'm not talking about toxic positivity here. I'm not saying you should slap a smile on your face and pretend everything's wonderful when it's not. That's just denial with better lighting. What I'm talking about is consciously choosing which reality you're going to reinforce with your attention and your words. There's a difference between acknowledging a challenge and making it your identity. There's a difference between saying, "This situation is difficult right now," and saying, "My life is always difficult." One is an observation, the other is a declaration of permanence. The people who change their lives aren't the ones who deny reality. They're the ones who refuse to give their problems more power through constant repetition. They acknowledge what is, but they speak more about what they're moving toward. There's a woman I knew who had been struggling financially for years. Every conversation began the same way. "I'm so broke. I never have enough. Money just slips through my fingers." She wasn't lying, those were her circumstances. But she was also cementing them with every repetition. One day I asked her, "What if you stopped announcing your poverty and started announcing your intention?" She looked at me like I'd suggested she deny reality. But I said, "I'm not asking you to pretend you're wealthy. I'm asking you to stop giving your lack a microphone." She started small. Instead of "I'm so broke," she began saying, "I'm building my financial foundation." Instead of "I never have enough," she'd say, "I'm learning to manage what I have with more wisdom." The circumstances didn't change overnight, but something in her did. She stopped wearing her struggle like an identity badge, and within months, opportunities began appearing that had always been there but invisible to someone convinced of their permanent poverty. This is what I mean when I say words are creative power. They don't just describe, they instruct. Every time you speak, you're giving orders to the invisible forces that arrange your life. And those forces are remarkably obedient. They don't question whether you really mean it. They simply say, "Your word is law," and begin organizing circumstances to match. Now here's what trips people up. They think because they want something desperately, the universe knows their true intention. They think their desire counts more than their declarations. But desire without corresponding words is like a seed without soil. It has potential, but no place to root. You must give your desire a voice. You must speak it into the realm where creation begins. And you must speak it with the kind of casual certainty that doesn't need to convince anyone, not even yourself. That's the tone of manifestation, not desperate affirmation, not pleading prayer. Just simple, matter-of-fact statement. I am guided to my right work. My perfect home is prepared for me. I am surrounded by love and harmony. These aren't wishes. They're announcements of what already exists in the invisible realm, waiting for your recognition to pull them into form. But most people speak the opposite into existence. They announce their fears more than their intentions. They describe their problems with more passion than their possibilities. And then they wonder why their lives feel like an endless loop of the same struggles. The universe doesn't respond to what you secretly hope for. It responds to what you consistently declare. And if your declarations are filled with limitation, complaint, and fear, that's exactly what will continue to show up, not because you're cursed, but because you're creating it with every word. So here's what I invite you to do, and I mean truly invite, because this isn't about perfection, it's about practice. Start listening to yourself. Not in a judgmental way, but with genuine curiosity. What are you saying when things don't go your way? What words come out of your mouth when you open your bank account, when you look in the mirror, when someone asks how you're doing? Because most of us are on autopilot. We say the same negative phrases so often they've become invisible to us. I'm broke. Nothing ever works out for me. I can't afford that. People always let me down. These aren't just casual observations, they're commands. They're instructions you're giving to the universe about what to create more of in your life. And I know what you might be thinking. But Florence, I'm just being honest. I am broke. Things don't work out. And I hear you. But here's the difference between honesty and creation. You can acknowledge where you are without cementing yourself there. You can say, I'm in a tight spot financially right now, but I'm open to abundance flowing to me. You can say, that didn't work out, but I trust something better is coming. Do you feel the difference? One version is a prison, the other is a doorway. The words we speak are either building walls or opening windows. They're either keeping us locked in the old story or inviting in the new one. And the beautiful thing is, you get to choose. Every single time you open your mouth, you get to choose whether you're reinforcing the past or calling in the future. I remember working with a woman who would say, every single day, I never have enough time. Morning, noon, and night, I don't have time for that. There's never enough time. I'm so behind. And then she'd wonder why her days felt frantic, why she was always rushing, why she could never catch up. She was literally speaking her experience into being over and over again. So I challenged her, for 1 week, stop saying you don't have time. Instead, say, I have all the time I need for what matters. Even if it felt like a lie at first, even if her schedule hadn't changed. And do you know what happened? Within 3 days, opportunities started opening up. A meeting got canceled, giving her a free afternoon. Someone offered to help with a project she thought she had to do alone. Little pockets of time appeared that had always been there, but she'd been too busy declaring scarcity to notice them. The universe didn't suddenly create more hours in her day. It simply responded to her new declaration. She stopped affirming chaos, and chaos stopped being her reality. This is the part where people say, but Florence, isn't that just positive thinking? Doesn't it ignore real problems? No, it doesn't ignore anything, it transforms it. There's a massive difference between denying reality and refusing to give it power. When you change your words, you're not pretending the problem doesn't exist, you're shifting your relationship to it. You're moving from victim to creator. From powerless to powerful. Let me tell you about Sarah. She'd been stuck in the same job for 7 years, watching less qualified people get promoted around her. Every Monday morning she'd say to herself, I'm trapped in this dead-end job. Nobody appreciates me. I'll never get ahead. And you know what? She was absolutely right. Not because it was true, but because she kept speaking it into existence. Then one day, after another rejection for a position she was perfect for, something in her snapped. Not in a breaking way, in a waking up way. She realized her words were building a prison around her opportunities. She started changing her language, not with flowery affirmations that felt fake, just simple shifts. Instead of "I'm trapped," she said, "I'm preparing for something better." Instead of "nobody appreciates me," she said, "I'm building skills that will be recognized." Instead of "I'll never get ahead," she said, "my breakthrough is forming right now." Within 3 months, a former colleague reached out about a position at another company. The salary was 40% higher. The role was exactly what she'd been qualified for all along. But here's what she told me that gave me chills. The opportunity was probably always there. I just couldn't see it through the fog of my own words. Your words create a filter through which you experience reality. When you speak lack, you literally train your mind to look for evidence of lack. Your brain is incredibly efficient. It shows you exactly what you tell it to find. It's not being cruel, it's being obedient. This is why 2 people can walk through the exact same day and have completely different experiences. One person speaks opportunity, the other speaks obstacle. One person speaks abundance, the other speaks scarcity. They're living in the same world, but they're not experiencing the same reality. You might be thinking, but what if I'm just being realistic? What if things really are difficult right now? And yes, I hear you. Circumstances are real, bills are real, challenges are real. I'm not suggesting you pretend your way out of genuine problems. But here's what I am suggesting. There's a difference between acknowledging a circumstance and empowering it with your words. There's a difference between saying, "This is challenging," and "This is impossible." There's a difference between "I don't have this yet," and "I'll never have this." One speaks truth to the moment. The other speaks a sentence over your future. And your subconscious mind? It doesn't know the difference between description and declaration. When you say, "I can't afford this," your subconscious doesn't hear it as temporary commentary. It hears it as permanent identity. It begins organizing your life around that statement. It closes doors you didn't even know were opening. Think of your words like seeds. You wouldn't plant thistle seeds in your garden and expect roses to grow. You wouldn't plant weeds and hope for vegetables. Yet every day, people plant word seeds of failure, lack, and limitation, then wonder why their life doesn't bloom with success. The universe is literal. It takes you at your word. When you say, "I'm so broke," it says, "Okay, let me show you more ways to be broke." When you say, "Nothing ever works out for me," it says, "Sure. Let me arrange circumstances that confirm that belief." It's not punishing you, it's just responding to your order. This is why affirmations alone don't always work. You can stand in front of a mirror and say, "I am wealthy," 100 times. But if underneath that, your dominant mental attitude is one of lack and limitation, if your inner conversation is a constant stream of "I can't afford this," and "money is so hard to come by," you're just putting a thin coat of paint over a crumbling wall. The subconscious doesn't hear the words you're forcing yourself to say for 5 minutes in the morning. It hears the thoughts you think all day long. It hears the tone of your inner voice. It feels the emotional frequency you're broadcasting from the moment you wake up to the moment you fall asleep. That's the real work. Not the affirmation you speak out loud, but the mental atmosphere you live in. Not the vision board you look at for 2 minutes, but the images you hold in your imagination hour after hour. The universe doesn't respond to your wishes. It responds to your assumptions. It responds to what you genuinely believe to be true about yourself and your life. So many people are walking around affirming one thing while believing another. They're saying, "I am abundant," while feeling terrified about their bank account. They're declaring, "I am loved," while feeling fundamentally unworthy of love. And then they wonder why nothing changes. It's because you can't fool the subconscious. You can't trick it with words. It knows what you really believe. It knows where you actually live mentally and emotionally. I knew a woman who wanted to get married more than anything. She did all the spiritual practices. She wrote lists about her ideal partner. She visualized her wedding day. She prayed and affirmed and did everything she was supposed to do. But every time a good man showed interest in her, she'd find something wrong with him. She'd sabotage the relationship before it even started. And when we really talked about it, when we dug beneath the surface, she admitted she didn't actually believe she deserved a wonderful relationship. Her father had abandoned her when she was young, and deep down, she believed all men would eventually leave. She believed she was fundamentally unlovable. So no matter how many affirmations she spoke, her subconscious was running a different program entirely. It was protecting her from the pain of abandonment by making sure she never got close enough to anyone to be left. That's the trap so many people fall into. They're trying to use spiritual principles like magic spells, like if they just say the right words in the right order, everything will change. But this isn't about magic, it's about alignment. It's about bringing your conscious desires into harmony with your subconscious beliefs. It's about changing the inner atmosphere so completely that the outer circumstances have no choice but to reflect it. And here's what's beautiful. Once you understand this, once you really get that your subconscious is just following orders, you stop being a victim. You stop blaming the universe or God or other people for your circumstances. You realize you've been the one giving the orders all along. And if you've been giving the wrong orders, you can start giving new ones, right now. This moment. You don't have to wait for anything to change externally. You can change your inner world immediately and watch as the outer world rearranges itself to match. I've seen this principle work in the most unexpected ways. A woman once came to me who had been struggling financially for years. She had tried every practical solution. She'd cut expenses, worked multiple jobs, budgeted down to the penny. Nothing changed. But when we looked at her inner conversation, she was constantly saying, "I can't afford it, there's never enough. Money slips through my fingers." I asked her to change just one thing. Every time she caught herself thinking a thought of lack, she was to immediately say, "There is a divine supply for every demand." Not to force belief, but simply to interrupt the pattern. To plant a different seed. Within 2 weeks, opportunities began appearing that she hadn't seen before. A former colleague reached out with a job offer. She found money she'd forgotten about in an old account. A client who owed her money suddenly paid up after months of silence. The circumstances didn't change because the world shifted. They changed because she shifted. She began looking through different eyes, and different things became visible to her. This is what I mean by changing your inner world. Your inner world is the filter through which you perceive everything. It's the lens that determines what you notice, what you dismiss, what you think is possible, and what you think is out of reach. Change the lens, and you change what you see. Change what you see, and you change what you experience. You might be thinking, but what about real problems? What about circumstances that genuinely need to change? I'm not suggesting you deny reality. I'm suggesting you stop giving reality all the power. Your current circumstances are the result of past thinking. They're old news. They're yesterday's mental diet showing up today. If you keep reacting to them with the same thoughts and feelings, you'll just keep creating more of the same. But the moment you shift your inner world, the moment you decide to see things differently, to speak differently, to feel differently, you set a new cause in motion, and that new cause must produce a new effect. It's law. It's as reliable as gravity. Let me give you something practical. Right now, think of one situation in your life that feels stuck. Maybe it's a relationship that's strained, a goal that feels impossible, a pattern you can't seem to break. Now, instead of focusing on why it's stuck, ask yourself, what would I need to believe for this to resolve easily? What thought would someone hold who experiences this flowing effortlessly? Don't ask how it will happen. That's not your job. Your job is to align with the feeling of the wish fulfilled, to step into the inner experience of already having what you desire. Because here's the secret they don't teach you. The universe doesn't respond to what you want, it responds to what you are. It mirrors back the state you're occupying. If you're occupying a state of lack, of struggle, of not yet, the universe says, okay, here's more lack, more struggle, more not yet. But if you occupy a state of fulfillment, of ease, of it is done, the universe rearranges circumstances to match that inner reality. I know it sounds too simple. We've been taught that transformation requires enormous effort, years of therapy, perfect conditions. But the truth is simpler and more immediate than that. You can change in an instant. Not your circumstances, those take a moment to catch up. But you, your inner world, your vibrational state that can shift right now. And when it shifts, everything else must follow. That's the part most people never grasp. They're waiting for the evidence to believe. But belief creates the evidence, not the other way around. You don't wait until you see the money to feel abundant. You feel abundant now, and the money has no choice but to appear. It's law, as sure as planting a seed brings forth a plant. I've watched this unfold in the most remarkable ways. A woman came to me once, drowning in debt, barely able to feed her children. Every bill that arrived felt like another stone around her neck. And I told her, what I'm telling you, you must stop rehearsing your lack. Stop telling the story of what you don't have. She looked at me like I'd lost my senses. But Florence, she said, I'm simply being honest. This is my reality. And I said, your reality is what you keep speaking into existence. You're not being honest, you're being loyal to limitation. That distinction changed everything for her. She realized she'd been defending her poverty, justifying it, giving it all her energy and attention. So we began a new practice. Every time fear came knocking with a bill in its hand, she would say, God is my unfailing supply. Every need is met before I even ask. She didn't wait until she believed it. She spoke it anyway. She spoke it especially when it felt like a lie, because that's when it matters most. Within 2 months, money began appearing from the most unexpected sources. A forgotten insurance policy, a surprise inheritance from a distant relative she barely knew, a job offer that seemed to materialize out of thin air. Not because she manipulated anything, but because she stopped blocking the natural flow of abundance with her words of lack. You see, life is always trying to give to you. The universe isn't withholding anything, you are. With every worried thought, every fearful word, every moment you spend contemplating what might go wrong, you're slamming the door in the face of your good. You're telling life, no thank you, I'd rather stay small, I'd rather stay safe in my familiar suffering. But your soul didn't come here to stay small. It came here to expand, to experience, to demonstrate what's possible when you align with the infinite. And alignment isn't something you have to earn or achieve. It's something you simply stop resisting. Think of it like a radio. The signal is always broadcasting. The music is always playing. But if your dial is turned to static, if you're tuned to the frequency of doubt and fear and impossibility, you won't hear the song that's meant for you. You have to deliberately, consciously turn the dial. And you do that with your thoughts, your words, your feelings. So let me ask you, what frequency are you living on right now? Are you tuned to lack or abundance? To fear or faith? To the problem or the solution? Because wherever your attention goes, your energy flows. And wherever your energy flows, manifestation grows. This isn't about pretending problems don't exist. It's about refusing to give them the power of your sustained attention. It's about saying, yes, I see this challenge, but I also see the infinite intelligence within me that knows exactly how to resolve it. And then you let go. You stop trying to force solutions with your limited human mind, and you allow the divine mind to work through you. This is perhaps the most difficult part of the journey, because we've been conditioned to believe that if we're not worrying about something, we're being irresponsible. We think that constant vigilance over our problems is what makes us good stewards of our lives. But the truth is exactly the opposite. Worry is not preparation. Anxiety is not planning. Fear is not protection. When you catch yourself spiraling into worry, ask yourself this simple question. Is this thought helping me create what I want, or is it keeping me bound to what I don't want? That question alone can snap you out of hours of mental spinning. Because the moment you become aware of where your attention is flowing, you reclaim your power to redirect it. I remember a woman who came to me absolutely convinced she was going to lose her home. The financial pressure was real. The notices were real. But what wasn't serving her was the endless mental rehearsal of eviction, homelessness, and ruin. Every spare moment, she was there, living in that catastrophic future in her mind. And I said to her, you're spending more time in that terrible future than you are in this present moment where you still have a roof over your head. What if you took all that energy and used it to see yourself secure, supported, and divinely provided for? She resisted at first. It felt like denial to her, like she was being foolish or naive. But I explained that she wasn't denying the challenge. She was denying the challenge the power to be her only reality. She was making space for a different outcome. And slowly, deliberately, she began to shift. Every time the fear arose, she would acknowledge it and then say, divine intelligence knows the way. I am guided to the right action at the right time. She stopped fighting the fear and started redirecting her focus. Within weeks, opportunities began to appear. An unexpected source of income, a conversation that led to a solution she hadn't considered, a grace period she didn't know was available. The outer circumstances shifted because her inner state had shifted first. She stopped feeding the nightmare and started nourishing a different vision. This is the work, not ignoring reality, but refusing to make catastrophe your dwelling place. Not pretending everything is perfect, but choosing to focus on the aspect of your situation that contains possibility rather than the aspect that contains only doom. Because wherever you place your attention consistently, that's what grows, that's what expands, that's what becomes your lived experience. And here's something else that happens when you stop feeding the negative thought loop. You create space for intuition. You create space for inspired action. When your mind is consumed with fear, there's no room for the still small voice that's trying to guide you toward your next right step. But when you quiet the chaos, when you withdraw your energy from the anxiety spiral, suddenly you can sense the subtle nudges, the gentle promptings, the ideas that arrive fully formed in a moment of peace. This is why the practice of turning away from appearances is not about ignoring reality, it's about changing which reality you're tuned into. When you look at your bank account and feel that familiar contraction in your chest, you're tuning into the frequency of lack. When you check your phone for a message that hasn't arrived and spiral into worry, you're broadcasting on the channel of abandonment. But the moment you catch yourself, the moment you consciously pivot and say, I refuse to give my power to this fear, something shifts in the invisible realm where all outcomes are born. You become like a gardener who stops watering the weeds and redirects the hose toward the flowers. The weeds don't disappear immediately, they're still there, still visible, but they're no longer being fed. Meanwhile, what you do feed begins to flourish. This is the mechanics of manifestation that most people miss. They think they need to pretend the weeds don't exist, to affirm loudly that there are only flowers while secretly knowing the garden is overrun. That's not faith, that's denial with a spiritual veneer. Real faith acknowledges what is while refusing to accept it as final. Real faith says, yes, I see this situation, yes, it looks difficult. And I also know that what I see with my physical eyes is only a small fraction of what's actually available to me. It's the difference between someone who closes their eyes and insists they're not in a dark room, and someone who opens their eyes wide in the darkness and says, I know there's a light switch here somewhere, and I'm going to find it. I've watched people transform impossible situations by this principle alone. A woman once came to me whose business was failing, her debts mounting, her health deteriorating from the stress. Every morning, she would wake up and immediately begin the mental inventory of everything that was wrong. She would check her bank balance first thing, reinforcing the fear. She would read collection notices, catastrophize about the future, play out worst-case scenarios in her mind until she was paralyzed. I told her to stop. Not to stop dealing with her responsibilities, but to stop giving her creative energy to the disaster narrative. Every morning, before she checked anything external, she was to spend 20 minutes in what I call the silence. Not forcing affirmations, not trying to convince herself of anything, but simply refusing to engage with fear. Just sitting quietly, withdrawing her attention from the problem, and getting still enough to hear what her intuition wanted to tell her. She resisted at first. It felt irresponsible, she said, to not immediately confront the severity of her situation each morning. But she agreed to try. And within days, something remarkable happened. Not that her circumstances changed immediately, they didn't. But she began receiving ideas. Simple, practical, intuitive nudges. A thought about someone she should call. An impulse to revisit an old business contact. A clear sense that she should pivot her services in a specific direction. Because she was no longer drowning in anxiety, she could hear these whispers. Because she wasn't broadcasting panic, she could receive guidance. And as she followed these subtle promptings, each one feeling almost too simple to matter, doors began to open. Not through force or frantic effort, but through what looked like coincidence and luck. Within 6 months, her business had completely turned around. Not because she denied her problems, but because she stopped giving them all her spiritual power. This is what I mean when I say your inner conversation creates your outer experience. The universe is always listening to what you're saying in the privacy of your own mind. It's responding not to your wishful thinking or your occasional positive affirmation, but to your consistent mental state, your habitual inner dialogue, your default frequency. And here's what makes this so powerful. You can change that frequency right now. Not tomorrow, not when circumstances are different, not when you finally feel worthy enough right now, in this very moment. You don't need permission. You don't need to wait for external validation. The moment you shift your inner conversation, you shift your vibrational address, and the universe begins responding to your new location. I've seen people transform their entire reality in a matter of weeks, not because their circumstances changed first, but because they stopped rehearsing lack and started rehearsing fulfillment. They stopped narrating their lives like victims and started narrating them like creators. One woman I worked with was drowning in debt, constantly thinking, "I can't afford this, I never have enough. Money slips through my fingers." Every single day, that was her mental soundtrack. I asked her to change just one thing, her inner money conversation. Instead of "I can't afford this," she started saying, "Money flows to me easily." Instead of "I never have enough," she practiced, "I am abundantly supplied." Not as empty affirmations, she muttered, while still believing the opposite, but as her new default channel. She tuned her mental radio to abundance and refused to switch back to the scarcity station. Within 3 weeks, she received an unexpected check from an old insurance claim she'd forgotten about. Within 2 months, she got a promotion she hadn't even applied for. Within 6 months, she was completely debt-free. Now, the skeptic will say, "That's just coincidence." But here's what I know. There are no coincidences. The universe doesn't operate on random chance. It operates on vibrational alignment. When you change your inner conversation, you change your magnetic field, and you begin attracting different experiences, different opportunities, different people. You literally become a different energetic match. Think of it like this. If you're constantly broadcasting fear, worry, and limitation in your mind, you're sending out a signal that says, "Send me more things to fear, worry about, and feel limited by." The universe, being the perfect mirror that it is, obliges. But the moment you change that broadcast to confidence, gratitude, and expectation of good, you're sending out a completely different signal. Send me confirmation of my abundance, evidence of my worth, opportunities that match my new frequency. And again, the universe obliges. This is why 2 people can go through the exact same experience and come out completely differently. One person loses their job and thinks, "This is terrible. I'm a failure. I'll never recover." Their inner conversation becomes a spiral of defeat. The other person loses the same job and thinks, "This is redirection. Something better is coming. This is making space for my next chapter." Their inner conversation becomes a story of expectation and possibility. Guess which person finds a better opportunity faster? The one whose inner conversation aligns with success. Every single time. Because your inner conversation isn't just describing your reality, it's prescribing it. It's writing the script that your life will follow, and most people never realize they're holding the pen. They think life is happening to them, when really, they're happening to life through the stories they tell themselves all day long. So right now, I want you to pause and listen. What's your inner conversation been about your finances, your relationships, your health, your worth? Have you been narrating struggle or ease, lack or abundance, rejection or acceptance? Because whatever you've been narrating, that's what you've been creating. And if you don't like what you've created, the most powerful thing you can do is change the narration. The universe is incredibly literal. It listens to your words with absolute precision and says, "Yes, that's what you're choosing? Okay, here it is." When you say, "I'm always struggling," the universe doesn't argue. It doesn't say, "No, you're not." It says, "Struggling it is," and gives you more of it. When you say, "I can't catch a break," the universe replies, "You certainly can't, and make sure you don't." It's not being cruel, it's being obedient. This is why so many people live in confusion. They say they want one thing, but their words create something completely different. They say they want abundance, then turn around and say, "I can't afford that." They say they want love, then constantly declare, "Nobody ever stays." They say they want health, then narrate illness every time they open their mouth. And they wonder why their prayers seem to go unanswered. The prayer is being answered. The problem is, you're praying with your words all day long, and most of those prayers are asking for what you don't want. Here's something I learned that changed everything. Words are not neutral. They're not just sounds that float away into nothing. Words are creative forces. They set things in motion. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Everything that exists began as a word, a vibration, a spoken thing. Your life is the same. It began with words, and it continues through words. You are speaking your existence into being every single day. So what happens when you change the words? What happens when you stop narrating lack and start narrating abundance? What happens when you stop declaring struggle and start declaring ease? Everything changes. I mean that literally. Not eventually. Not after you've done enough affirmations for 6 months. Now, the moment you change your words, you change the energy you're putting into the field. You change what you're calling toward you. You change what you're available to receive. I watched a woman do this with her business. She'd been saying for years, "It's so hard to find good clients. Nobody wants to pay what I'm worth. The economy is terrible." And her business reflected every single word. She was scraping by, constantly hustling, never getting ahead. Then one day, she decided to change her narration, not her business plan, not her marketing, her narration. She started saying, "Ideal clients come to me easily. People love paying me because they receive so much value. My business flows with divine timing." Within 2 weeks, 3 dream clients appeared out of nowhere. Within a month, her income doubled. She was doing the exact same work. But the narration changed, so the story changed. This isn't magic, this is law. The law of mind in action, the law of vibration, the law of correspondence. As within, so without. As you speak, so you create. But here's where people get tripped up. They try to change their words without changing their belief, and it doesn't work. You can't just paste pretty affirmations over deep conviction of lack. You can't say, "I am abundant," while your inner narrator is screaming, "This is ridiculous, I'm broke." The universe responds to your dominant vibration, not your desperate hope. The key is to work from both ends simultaneously. You speak the word yes, but you also tend to the soil of your subconscious where that word must take root. You can't force a belief, but you can starve the old one and feed the new one. Think of it like retraining your ear for music. At first, when you hear a new language or a complex piece of music, it sounds like noise, but you keep listening, you keep exposing yourself to it, and gradually your ear adjusts. You start hearing patterns, melodies, meaning. Your subconscious mind works the same way, so you speak your word, even when it feels strange in your mouth. You say, "I am divinely provided for," even when your bank account whispers otherwise. But you don't just say it mechanically, like you're trying to hypnotize yourself. You say it with curiosity, with openness, as if you're trying on a new identity to see how it fits. And then you watch for evidence. This is critical. Your subconscious is always collecting evidence for whatever you believe. If you believe life is hard, you'll notice every difficulty and overlook every grace. If you believe you're unlucky in love, you'll interpret every interaction through that lens. But when you plant a new word, you become a detective for its truth. You start noticing the ways abundance already shows up, even in small ways. Someone buys you coffee, you find a penny. You get an unexpected compliment. Most people would dismiss these as coincidence or insignificance, but you're training yourself to see them as breadcrumbs, as evidence that the universe is friendly, that supply is everywhere. I remember a woman who came to me drowning in debt. She had been affirming prosperity for months with no results, growing more frustrated and cynical by the day. I asked her what she noticed after she spoke her affirmations. She said, "Nothing. Absolutely nothing changes." So I gave her an assignment. For 1 week, after speaking her word about divine supply, she was to write down every single piece of evidence that supported it, no matter how small. Free samples at the grocery store, a friend paying for lunch, finding a quarter on the sidewalk, a sunset that cost nothing but filled her with joy. By the end of the week, she had pages of evidence. Her circumstances hadn't changed dramatically yet, but her vibration had. She went from feeling like a victim of scarcity to feeling held by an abundant universe. And within a month, new income streams began opening that she never could have predicted. This is how you bridge the gap. between speaking and believing. You don't wait for belief to feel 100% certain before you speak. You speak, and then you lovingly gather evidence until belief becomes natural. And here's something else people miss. The words you speak to yourself are one thing, but the words you speak about others are just as powerful. You cannot hold someone else in a consciousness of limitation without limiting yourself. You cannot gossip about someone's failure without reinforcing the belief that failure is possible, that it's normal, that it's what happens to people. This is why truly prosperous people don't tear others down. It's not because they're morally superior, it's because they understand the law. When you speak words of abundance, success, and blessing over others, even your competitors, even people who've wronged you, you're reinforcing those frequencies in your own consciousness. You're reminding the universe what you believe is possible. I knew a man who was passed over for a promotion he felt he deserved. His first instinct was to badmouth the person who got it, to point out all their flaws and inadequacies. But he had been studying these principles, and he caught himself. Instead, he blessed the person. He spoke words of success and congratulations, even though it hurt his ego to do so. Within 3 months, a better opportunity opened up at a different company with higher pay and more responsibility. He later told me that the act of blessing his perceived competitor broke something inside him, some tight grip of fear and scarcity. It freed him to receive what was actually his. Your words are not just about manifesting things. They're about becoming someone different, someone who lives in a different reality. And that reality isn't waiting somewhere in the future, it exists now, in parallel, and your words are the bridge that carries you there. Think about it like this. Right now, in this moment, there are infinite versions of your life happening. There's the version where you're financially abundant, the version where you're deeply loved, the version where your body is healthy and vibrant. These aren't fantasies, they're frequencies. They're stations on a radio dial. And most people are stuck on one station, complaining about the static, never realizing they can simply turn the dial. Your words are how you change the station. When you say, "I am wealthy," you're not lying to yourself. You're not pretending. You're tuning into the frequency where that version of you already exists. You're aligning with it. And the more you speak from that place, the more your external reality shifts to match it. But here's what trips people up. They think the shift should be instant. They say the words once, twice, maybe for a week, and then they look around and say, "See, nothing changed." This doesn't work. That's like planting a seed and digging it up the next day because you don't see a tree yet. The shift is happening. It's always happening. But it's happening first in the invisible realm, in your consciousness, in your energy, in the way you perceive the world. And then, gradually, sometimes suddenly, the external world catches up. I've seen this over and over. A woman comes to me, desperate for money. She's been affirming abundance for months but sees no results. So I ask her, "When you say, 'I am abundant,' what happens right after?" She pauses. Then she says, "I feel good for a second. Then I think about my bank account and feel like a liar." There it is, the contradiction, the mixed signal. She's speaking abundance but feeling lack. And the universe doesn't respond to words alone, it responds to the vibration behind the words. So I tell her, "You're not lying. You're remembering. When you say, 'I am abundant,' you're not describing your current bank account. You're describing your true nature. You're speaking from your soul, not your circumstances." That reframe changes everything. Because now, when she speaks, she's not trying to convince herself of something that feels untrue. She's simply reminding herself of what's already real in the spiritual dimension. And when she speaks from that place, the words carry a different power. They carry conviction. And conviction is the secret ingredient that makes words work miracles. You've heard the phrase, "speak with authority," right? Most people think authority means speaking loudly or forcefully, but real authority comes from alignment. It's when your words, your feelings, and your beliefs are all pointing in the same direction. When there's no internal argument, no doubt whispering in the background. That's when your words become irresistible to the universe. Think about people who command respect without raising their voice. Leaders who walk into a room and everyone listens. They're not louder than anyone else. They're aligned. Their inner and outer worlds match, and you can feel it. You can cultivate that same alignment with your words. Not by forcing yourself to believe something, but by choosing words that feel like truth to your soul, even if they don't yet match your circumstances. For example, instead of saying, "I will be happy," which puts happiness in the future and keeps it forever out of reach, you say, "I choose happiness now." That's not a lie. That's a decision, and it's a decision you can make regardless of what's happening around you. Or instead of, "I hope things get better," you say, "I trust that everything is working for my good." Again, that's not pretending, that's perspective, that's faith. And faith spoken aloud becomes creative power. Your words don't just describe reality, they select which reality you experience. Out of all the possible outcomes, all the potential timelines, your words are the choosing mechanism, they're the filter. And most people never realize they're walking around with a filter set to lack, or fear, or limitation, wondering why their life looks that way. You have to consciously reset the filter, every single day. Every time you catch yourself speaking death, you stop and speak life instead. Every time you hear yourself affirming problems, you pivot and affirm solutions. This isn't toxic positivity. This isn't pretending bad things don't exist. This is spiritual maturity. This is understanding that what you focus on expands, and your words are the most powerful focusing tool you have. Let me tell you what happened with a woman who came to me absolutely drowning in financial complaints. Every conversation started with what she couldn't afford. Every interaction circled back to her limitations. She wore her poverty like a badge of honor, as if constantly discussing her lack somehow proved she was honest or realistic. I watched her for weeks, and I noticed something fascinating. People didn't want to be around her. Opportunities seemed to avoid her. Even when good things appeared in her life, she would immediately talk them away, explaining why they wouldn't last or weren't enough. I finally said to her, "Your words are building a wall between you and your prosperity. Every complaint is another brick." She looked at me like I was speaking another language. "But I'm just telling the truth," she protested. "These are facts." "Facts change," I told her. "But your words are keeping these particular facts locked in place." I gave her one assignment. For 30 days, she could not speak about money in negative terms. She couldn't complain about bills, discuss what she couldn't afford, or participate in poverty conversations. If she had nothing positive to say about her finances, she was to say nothing at all. The first week was torture for her. She realized that negative money talk had become her primary form of communication. Without it, she felt like she had nothing to say. But she persisted. By the second week, something shifted. Without the constant rehearsal of limitation, her mind started noticing opportunities it had been blind to before. A part-time position materialized, an old debt was forgiven, small checks appeared from unexpected places. By the end of 30 days, her financial situation hadn't completely transformed, but something more important had changed. She had broken the hypnotic spell of her own negative words. She had stopped being the narrator of her own poverty story. And here's what I want you to understand. Your words don't just describe your reality, they prescribe it. They write the prescription for what you'll experience tomorrow. Every time you speak, you're placing an order with the universe, and the universe is very literal. It doesn't understand sarcasm or exaggeration. It just hears your words and says, "As you wish." This is why complainers always have something to complain about. This is why people who constantly talk about their health problems rarely experience vibrant health. This is why those who speak endlessly about betrayal keep getting betrayed. They're ordering the same meal over and over and then wondering why the menu never changes. Your words are creating a vibrational match. They're setting the frequency that determines what can enter your experience. When you speak lack, you become a magnet for lack. When you speak limitation, you tune your receiver to the limitation channel. It's not punishment. It's just law. I've seen this play out in every area of life. The person who constantly jokes about being unlucky in love somehow never meets the right person. The one who always talks about how hard life is keeps encountering situations that confirm that belief. The one who speaks about people being untrustworthy keeps finding themselves surrounded by untrustworthy people. They think they're just observing reality, but they're creating it with every word. Now, I can already hear some of you saying, "But Florence, what if I need to process something? What if I need to talk about what's wrong so I can fix it?" There's a difference between conscious problem solving and unconscious complaining. There's a difference between seeking wisdom about a challenge and rehearsing victimhood. One has intention and endpoint. The other is a loop that feeds on itself. When you bring your difficulty to someone who truly supports your highest good, you'll notice something remarkable. They don't let you stay comfortable in the problem. They might listen with compassion, yes, but then they gently turn your attention toward solution, toward truth, toward the spiritual reality behind the appearance. I had a student who would call me weekly with the same financial worry, told in slightly different words but essentially unchanged. One day I said to her, "My dear, we've spoken this prayer together 6 times now. Either you don't believe it works, or you're more attached to the worry than the answer." She was shocked at first, but then she laughed, really laughed, because she recognized the truth in it. She'd been using our conversations not to move forward but to validate her right to remain anxious. The next week she called with something different in her voice. She said, "I spoke my word for prosperity every morning this week, and I didn't call to tell you about the problem. I called to tell you I got a surprise contract that covers exactly what I needed." The shift wasn't in her circumstances first, it was in her willingness to stop the loop and actually claim her good. You see, the spiritual path isn't about finding more sophisticated ways to discuss your troubles. It's about breaking the hypnotic spell they cast over you. Every time you retell the story of lack, limitation, or hurt without moving toward resolution, you're casting that spell again. You're voting for the problem to continue. Now, this doesn't mean you ignore practical matters or pretend difficulties don't exist. If your roof is leaking, you call the roofer. If your body needs attention, you see the doctor. Spiritual truth doesn't negate practical action, it guides and supports it. But there's a vast difference between saying, "The roof needs repair," and "I trust the perfect solution will appear," versus endlessly dramatizing the leak to everyone you meet while doing nothing constructive about it. When you're truly working with spiritual law, there's a quality of peace that underlies even your challenges. You might not have the full answer yet, but you're not in panic. You're not rehearsing disaster. You're holding steady to the truth that good is finding its way to you, even as you take whatever human footsteps are yours to take. I love the phrase, "Take it to the Lord and leave it there." That's exactly the practice. You state your need clearly, you claim the spiritual truth, and then you release the anxious mental spinning. You don't keep checking if it's working like someone who plants a seed and digs it up every day to see if it's sprouting yet. The discipline here is catching yourself when you feel that familiar pull to retell the story. That urge that says, "Oh, I should mention this problem to so-and-so, they'll understand." Pause right there. Ask yourself honestly, am I seeking genuine guidance or am I seeking sympathy? Am I looking for solution or am I looking for validation of my victimhood? Because here's what I've learned through years of this work: sympathy without spiritual direction is quicksand. It feels supportive in the moment, but it keeps you stuck. What you actually need is someone who'll remind you of your power, not confirm your powerlessness. I've had people come to me and say, "But Florence, don't you think it's cruel to not sympathize when someone's genuinely suffering?" And I tell them there's a vast difference between sympathy and compassion. Sympathy says, "Yes, this terrible thing is happening to you, you poor thing." Compassion says, "I see you're experiencing this, and I know there's something greater in you that can transform it." One woman I worked with had surrounded herself with what she called her support system, a group of friends who gathered regularly to discuss their problems. Every week, they'd meet and rehearse their grievances. She had the unsupportive husband, one friend had the difficult mother-in-law, another had the demanding boss. They'd validate each other's complaints, agree how hard everything was, maybe share a bottle of wine, and feel temporarily soothed. But nothing ever changed. Not one situation improved. If anything, the problems intensified because they were giving them so much attention and emotional energy. When she started working with me, I said, "Your support system is actually a suffering system. You're not supporting each other, you're anchoring each other to your problems." She was shocked at first, maybe even offended. But then something shifted. She started noticing how she'd leave those meetings feeling heavier, not lighter. Validated, yes, but also more stuck in her story. She began to change her relationships. Not abruptly, not unkindly, but firmly. When friends would launch into their familiar complaints, she'd say, "I wonder what this situation is trying to teach you?" Or, "What would it look like if this completely transformed?" Some friends adapted, others drifted away, uncomfortable with this new refusal to dwell in problems. And here's what happened: as she stopped participating in the collective rehearsal of difficulty, her own situation began to shift. The unsupportive husband suddenly started showing up differently. Not because he changed, but because she stopped defining him that way. She stopped telling the story of his unsupportiveness and started speaking the truth she wanted to see. Within months, they were communicating in ways they hadn't in years. This is the principle in action. What you refuse to energize begins to starve. What you withdraw your attention from loses its power over you. Your superconscious mind is always ready to show you the way through, but it can't reach you through a wall of commiseration. It speaks in the language of possibility, and if you're surrounded by people speaking the language of limitation, you won't hear it. I'm not saying isolate yourself. I'm saying be discerning about the energy you allow into your field. Choose companions who elevate you, who remind you of what's possible, who refuse to validate your limitations even when that refusal is uncomfortable. The spiritual path isn't always comfortable. In fact, it's often quite challenging to your ego, which loves the comfort of familiar suffering. Your ego would rather be right about how hard things are than be free. It would rather have sympathy than transformation. But your spirit knows better. Your superconscious mind is calling you toward something infinitely greater than the temporary comfort of commiseration. It's calling you toward actual freedom, actual joy, actual transformation, and the company you keep will either support that calling or suppress it. There's no middle ground. Every relationship is either lifting you toward your highest possibility or anchoring you to old patterns. This doesn't mean everyone in your life needs to be on a spiritual path. It means they need to at least be open to growth, willing to see possibility, capable of holding space for transformation rather than just validating problems. I've watched people completely reverse their momentum simply by changing who they spend time with. One woman came to me, drowning in debt and despair. Every friend she had was also in financial struggle, and their conversations were endless commiserations about how hard life was, how the system was rigged, how people like them never got ahead. I asked her to find just one person who believed in prosperity, who spoke about possibilities instead of limitations. She joined a business networking group, not because she had a business, but because she needed to be around people who thought differently. Within 3 months, opportunities started appearing. A job offer came through someone she met. An idea she'd dismissed suddenly seemed viable when someone else saw its potential. Her entire reality shifted not because she changed herself first, but because she changed her environment and let that environment change her. There's a powerful metaphor I use. You cannot drain a swamp while standing in the middle of it, surrounded by mosquitoes, up to your knees in mud. You have to get to higher ground first, breathe clean air, and approach from a position of clarity. That higher ground is your new environment, your new associations, your new influences. From there, you can address old patterns with perspective and power instead of being consumed by them. This is why I say the fastest path to transformation is often changing what flows into your consciousness daily. If you wake up and immediately scroll through disaster and drama, if you spend your commute listening to people argue about problems, if your lunch conversations are complaint sessions, if your evening is filled with shows about dysfunction and chaos, you are watering weeds. It doesn't matter how many affirmations you say if you're spending 8 hours a day cultivating the opposite energy. And here's what becomes truly magical. When you commit to guarding your inner environment as fiercely as you would guard your home, life begins meeting you differently. The universe reads your frequency and responds accordingly. Suddenly, you're receiving opportunities that match your new vibration. People who align with your growth start appearing. Resources you need become available. It's not coincidence. It's the natural consequence of energy alignment. I'll give you something practical to implement immediately. For the next 30 days, conduct a ruthless inventory of your inputs. Track where your attention goes. Notice what you're feeding your mind in those unconscious moments between activities. When you're waiting in line, driving, before bed, first thing in the morning, what thoughts are you entertaining? What content are you consuming? What conversations are you having? Then make one substitution each week. Replace one negative input with a positive one. Swap one limiting conversation for one expansive book. Exchange 1 hour of mindless scrolling for 1 hour of intentional learning or inspiration. You'll be shocked how quickly your inner world transforms. And as your inner world transforms, I promise you, your outer world must follow. It has no choice. The law is absolute. As within, so without. As in consciousness, so in experience. Guard your garden with devotion, and watch what grows there reshape your entire existence.